Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another session on the Merit Shine Turbo series, which is helping you prepare towards your SEBI Grade A and the RBI Grade B examinations. I have an interesting session in store for you today, wherein we'll cover a topic which is quite fundamental towards understanding a lot of topics in finance. So we're talking about debt markets, we're talking about bonds, we're talking about time value of money, and if you understand the fundamentals in here, a lot of concepts in finance will become a lot more easier for you to understand. And of course, an important topic from the perspective of the exam as well, right? And questions have appeared as far as both RBI as well as SEBI is concerned in the past. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a set of questions that have appeared in the past and use those questions to understand a lot of fundamental concepts as far as this particular topic is concerned. So without further ado, let's jump in and start with the session. Oh, but wait. As always, I want you to look at the question, pause the video, solve it for yourself, and then look at how I am approaching that question. The more you do that, the better you will basically get at solving the questions yourself, because at the end of the day, we're looking at improving your learning from the process and building your concepts, right? So stick with me, look at each question, answer it, and then look at the discussion on that question. So what are we waiting for? Let's start. So let's start the session with the first question for the day. 30 seconds for you to pause the video and mark your answers. And here we go. So what is this asking? It's asking about annuity. So obviously annuity refers to something that is happening on an annual basis. And what are the key terms over here? So one is obviously your net present value, also known as your NPV, which basically means whatever is the values of all the cash flows that may happen in different time periods, say first year, second year, third year, and so on. All of that is being brought to the beginning period in terms of the present. So it's being brought in and we're calculating the present value of those cash flows, right? Now, the cash flows could again be positive as well as negative. So it could be a cash inflow or a cash outflow as well. So what the question asks is NPVs for all the equal cash inflows for a finite period of time minus the NPVs of all the equal cash outflows during that period. So which means you'll calculate the NPV for all inflows and then subtract from that the NPV of cash outflows. Unfortunately, that's not the way how it happens. And for the same reason, option 2 also becomes incorrect, because whether it be finite period or infinite period, the actual calculation itself is wrong. Right? Now, that brings us to option number C and option D. Between these two, if I have to decide, it basically is talking about the net present value of all the cash flows, which means it's not specifically segregating them as cash outflows or cash inflows. So when I say net cash flows, every year it basically will be a positive or a negative, whatever be the cash outflows or inflows. All of those will be considered and cumulated to the present value. And once you reach the present value, you'll basically discount it using the rate whatever has been provided to arrive at the overall net present value, right? So when I talk about an annuity, right, in case of an annuity, all your cash flows are basically equal. That's the first thing. And it is not for a infinite period of time. It is there for a finite period of time. As a result, in this case, the correct answer to this question turns out to be option C. So we'll talk about the infinite period time also, but that's in another question. But as of now, while we're covering annuities, think of them as equal cash flows and the net present value of all of those cash flows, which is for a finite period of time. So the answer in this case becomes option C. Great. Let's move on to the second question for the day. As always, 30 seconds for you to pause the video and mark your answers. And here we go. So what is it asking? So it's basically saying that a person deposited rupees 250 in a bank where the interest is getting compounded. Okay. What would be the rate of return if rupees 250 becomes rupees 1000 in a period of 16 years? So there is a couple of important rules that you should be aware of. So there is a rule of 72, right? And there is a rule of 144. So we'll discuss rule of 72 in a bit, but when we look at rule of 144, it essentially says that 144 divided by, let's say if the rate of interest is I, whatever is my answer, that would be the number of years it would take for any investment. Let's consider that amount to be X, for that investment to become 4 times its value, or the ideal word for that is for the investment to get quadrupled, right? How much time will it take for an investment to become 4 times its value? That is basically given by an indicative value of the rule of 144, which is nothing but whatever is 144 divided by the interest rate that has been provided, right? Similarly, if I'm looking to calculate the interest rate or the rate of return that is required, automatically the answer will turn out to be 144 divided by the number of years it basically takes for an investment to become 4 times its value, and that will give me the rate of return that we're looking for. So in this case, it's 144 divided by the duration that has been given to us is 16 years. So when we calculate this, this will come out to be 9%, which turns out to be the answer in this particular case. Right. Okay, let's move on to the third question for the day. Again, 30 seconds for you to pause the video and mark your answers. And here we go. So this is what I was talking about. This one basically refers to your rule of 72, wherein we're saying that how much time would be required for an investment to double in terms of its value. So the 1000 tends to become 2000, and in this case the rate of interest is given already, which means 72 divided by 8 will give me the number of years it will take for the investment to double itself, right? So in this case, because it's very clear, the answer comes out to be equal to 9 years as a straightforward answer. Just remember one thing when we talk about rule of 72 or rule of 144, it's important to understand that it gives an approximate value of your answer. It's not the exact answer, right? So because it's giving me an approximate value, as long as the options are quite far away, so let's say half a year is quite a long time. So if the options are quite far away, I'm still okay to use this method as an approximate value. But if the options are too close, wherein it says something like 9.1 or 9.2, then you may have to basically look at calculating as well. But in this case, the intent of the examiner is not to check whether you can calculate or not. The intent of the examiner is to figure out whether you're aware of these rules or not, right? So from that context, it's a straightforward question, and the answer in this case turns out to be 9 years. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Again, 30 seconds for you to pause the video and jot down your answers. And here we go. So what does this one say? It says if A invests rupees 5,000 at the end of each year for the next 5 years with an interest rate of 5%, what would be the total value of money at the end of 5 years? So basically it is expecting me to calculate the future value of the cash flows, right? And it's asking you to assume the future value of annuity factor to be 5.52, okay? And the value is given specifically for your rate of interest at the rate of 5% for a duration of 5 years. So technically, because the cash flow is 5,000 and it's a uniform cash flow, technically this is an annuity because it's happening annually and the amounts are also equal. Now the difference between an annuity and an annuity due is that an annuity basically happens at the end of that time period. So whatever the time period is, it happens at the end of that time period, whereas an annuity due basically happens at the beginning of that time period. So that's the fundamental difference that you need to be aware of. So of course, in this case, we're not talking about an annuity due because it is saying it's happening at the end of each period. So we are referring to an annuity only. Now, if I have to pure blank look at the actual numbers, it's fairly straightforward. It's 5.52 into 5,000, right? And that value is straightforward, around 27,600. Now, how do I arrive at that? Basically, it's 5.52 into 5,000. And your 5,000 obviously can be written as your 10K divided by 2. And 55,000 divided by 2 is roughly around 27,600. So you're able to get to this answer fairly straightforward. But what's important to understand is what is the exact concept behind this. So whenever I'm talking about the future value, that will basically be your present value multiplied by whatever is your interest rate. And let's say if the duration of 1 year is what we're consuming, then we're looking at this as your future value. Now what is happening is that each of these is basically the future value as per the given timeline, right? I'm looking at the value at this point in time, right? So what I'll need to do is look at the cash flows that are coming in at each of these years and figure out what exactly will be the value at year number 5. So let's look at each of these cases. So at time t is equal to 0, there is obviously no cash flow. Now in year 1, there was an initial cash flow of 5,000 that came through. Now, this cash flow of 5,000 will basically go into multiple iterations, right? So there'll be 4 years in which this cycle will go forward, right? So 5,000 will get compounded 4 years. So as a result, the future value of this particular cash flow at the end of year 1 will essentially turn out to be that I'm looking at it at the final timeline will basically give me the answer as 5,000 multiplied by 1.05, and this will be to the power of 4 because there are 4 time periods for which this is expected. Similarly, year 2 will see it as 1.05 to the power 3. Then year 3 will see it as 1.05 to the power 2, which means 2 time periods are left. Similarly, 1.05 to the power 1 at the end of year 4 because only 1 year is left. And the final cash flow of 5,000 will not see any future value component because we are calculating it at that same instant. So in this case, the 5,000 will actually be the present value and the future value becoming equal because the time period in this case is 0. As a result, it will become 1.05 to the power 0, which means it is 1. Now, if you add up all of these numbers put together, it basically will be equal to your future value annuity factor for a rate of interest of 5% for a period of 5 years. And this number exactly is given to you as 5.52. Now, as soon as I multiplied 5.52 by 5,000, I do get up into this answer mode, which is 27,600. Right? So this is more to explain to you. So you don't need to necessarily draw the timelines as far as the exam is concerned, but this is just to explain to you as to how exactly the calculation came about. So especially if you're looking to solve questions in the initial stages as far as time value of money is concerned, be it present value or future value, it is always going to help you if you try and do as per a timeline. So once you get familiarized with the concept, once you understand it effectively, then you can always look at doing straightforward, right? So this is to make you understand. That's the whole idea, right? So that's the approach for this particular question. And this was shown more to explain to you as to how this 5.52 came about. But as far as the question is concerned, it's a straightforward calculation of 5.52 multiplied by 5,000, and that gives me my answer. And if you're not someone who's fairly comfortable in this multiplication, even though this is actually quite straightforward, you can also look at 5 as 10 by 2, and that also gives you the answer in a very straightforward manner. So the answer in this case happens to be option B, which is 27,600. The more the number of shortcuts that you're aware of, or let's say mental mathematics, in case there are any questions that pertain to such scenarios, you'll be able to quickly calculate them rather than wasting any time. So wherever possible, try and use mental maths and speed up the entire process, right? Now let's move on to the 5th question for the day. Again, 30 seconds for you to pause the video and mark your answers. And here we go. What does it say? A bond which does not give any coupon payment is called what, right? So now there are 2 terms here which are self-explanatory, right? And both of them could definitely be my answer, right? So one is no coupon bond. It's understood that this bond will not give any coupon, right? But that's not the conventional name given to this particular bond. And the other option here which automatically conveys that there will be no coupon payment is the zero coupon bond, also sometimes called as your ZCBs. So what a zero coupon bond tells you is that, again, in this case, there is no coupon or a zero coupon that is being paid. So one important term that you need to understand here is what is known as your debenture. So essentially, when I talk about a debenture, it is basically a type of a bond, okay, or it could basically be any kind of a debt instrument wherein the underlying is a debt, right? And the point is that it is an instrument which is not secured, which is unsecured by any kind of collateral or any kind of covenants. Any kind of a debenture holder, right, or someone who holds a debenture will have to basically rely on the credit worthiness of the debenture issuer, because these are usually unsecured and do not provide any collateral. As a result, the reputation and the credit worthiness of the issuer becomes extremely critical as far as your debentures are concerned, right? So technically, in the normal parlance, both your corporations as well as your governments can basically issue debentures to raise capital or for raising funds. That's what debentures are all about, right? An annuity bond is basically a bond which would basically provide your equal cash flows, right, or the same amount of cash flows, which would probably be equal to the coupon, right, and that will be provided every year, right? So because it's a annuity, so that's the context. So technically, in this case, the answer becomes ZCB or your zero coupon bond, which fits the bill perfectly. So let's now move on to the 6th question for the day. Again, a few seconds for you to pause the video and mark your answers. And here we go. So what is it asking in this case? Which of the following is true with respect to zero coupon bonds? So as we discussed in the previous question as well, zero coupon bonds are basically not having any interim payment. So when I say interim, right, so there are no half yearly, quarterly or annual payments, right? All the payments will basically happen at maturity and nothing, zero payments in between. That's why it's called a zero coupon bond. So any of the options which says that there are no payments would be my automatic choice, right? So there are no payments till maturity, but one final payment at the time of maturity. So that becomes the answer in this case, and that's the fundamental characteristic of your zero coupon bonds, wherein there are no payments till maturity and one final payment at maturity, right? And that becomes our answer in this particular case. Okay, let's move on to the next question then. Again, 30 seconds for you to pause the video and jot down your answers. And here we go. So what does it say? It's basically asking you to calculate the price of a zero coupon bond which is maturing in 3 years and has a par value of rupees 1000, right? And the required rate of return is 8%. So which means that this will be basically redeemed at the end of the period at rupees 1000. But what will be the current price? So when I have to look at the current price, the way I'll have to look at it is the par value divided by whatever is the rate of interest, which is 1.08, and the duration in this case is 3 years, so it is 3 years, which will have to be considered as the discount period, right? So in this context, this is the number that I'm looking for. So, but if I look at the options, these are fairly close options. So how do I figure out the answer in this case? So the first thing is, when I look at your calculation, and this is a calculation which will definitely come in extremely handy for you. So the number is 108. So which can be written as 100 plus 8. Let's say, for example, whatever is the number in addition of 100, let's say that is x. Okay. The basic rule goes as you'll basically have 100 plus 3 times the number x. Okay. And then 3 times the number x square. And then you'll have x cube. Okay. That's the basic methodology in which it is obtained. So in this case, what happens is, since it is 100, 3 into 8, and then basically it's going to be 3 into 8 square, and then 8 cube, right? So since it is 8 cube, which basically becomes 512, and now we're talking about 8 square, which is nothing but 3 into 64, which gives you the value as 192, and this number is basically 124 because we're looking at 100. So the base in this case is 10 square. So since this number is 512, I'll consider only the last 2 digits, and this 5 gets taken forward over here, which will give me the value as 197. So again, 97 will be considered, and that 1 will again be taken forward. So you're left with 1259712 as the number that I'm looking at, right? So it basically becomes 1000 divided by 1.259712, right? So looking at this number, I know that 1000 by 1.25 will be roughly equal to 800. So I need a number which is extremely close to that. And in the given options, the number which is closest is basically your 793. And when you look at the actual calculations, you'll find out that that is indeed the correct answer. Now, just to reiterate, if instead of 108 you had a 104 and I'm looking at the cube of that, how will you go about doing it? Again, the same funda, you're looking at 100 plus 3 times 4, then you're looking at 3 times 4 square, and then looking at 4 cube. So since the base, again, because it is 100, is 100 or 10 square, so this number becomes 64, so you're fine with that. This number becomes 16 into 3, which is 48, and this number becomes 112. So the answer in that case would become 1124864. Now, the reason why this is a beneficial methodology is because whenever you're looking at questions like these, your usual maturity in terms of duration may be 2 years or 3 years, and ideally not more than that. And your percentages would also be, let's say, less than or equal to 10%. So if you're able to calculate cubes in this manner, then it will obviously become a lot easier for you to figure out the final answer, right? So this is something which I would want you to remember. If you're still not clear with this methodology, what I would recommend is look at the pinned comments in this particular video, and there you'll be able to find the link to this particular video, and this concept can be cleared for you, right? So in this case, once we are aware of the basic numbers, we know that the answer has to be closest to 800, and that in this case happens to be rupees 793, which indeed will become our answer. Great. Let's move on to the 8th question for the day. Again, 30 seconds for you to pause the video and mark your answers. And here we go. So what is it asking in this case? It's basically talking about a specific category of bonds called as your console bonds. Right? What are these? We just try and understand that a bit. Right? So this is again a type of a bond, right, which was given to certain kind of government debt issues, and these were issues which had a perpetuity associated with them, which means that they were sort of perpetual bonds, which means they exist for infinite period of time, right, and they are obviously redeemable at the option that is given by the government, right? So generally associated with the UK government, right, and technically the first obviously was issued by the Bank of England, and that's the reason why the name consols is associated with it. What are some of the other names for console bonds? These can also be called as your perpetual bonds, or the other name given to them is also prep bonds, right? So these are some of the other names given to your console bonds. So considering what we understand about them now, can we look at answering this question? So it's not a question of a large maturity or a lower maturity, right? So technically there is no maturity because these are perpetual, right? These keep continuing to exist and they pay a fixed coupon, whatever is the rate that has been decided. So that's the fundamental concept behind console bonds or perpetual bonds or prep as they are called. And the answer in this case becomes option C. Great. Let's now move on to the 9th question for the day. Again, 30 seconds for you to pause the video and mark your answers. And in this case, we're talking about something called as YTM. Now, what do I mean by YTM? YTM essentially refers to your yield to maturity, right? Now, what do I mean by YTM? It basically reflects the total return, right, which we tend to anticipate on that particular bond if such a bond is held on, or if it is held till its maturity. So what would be the total return that I can anticipate on a particular bond if that bond is held till maturity? That's the reason why it's called yield to maturity. कितना रिटर्न मिलेगा अगर मैं उस बॉन्ड को होल्ड करूं for that duration till the time it actually matures. Now technically it is considered as a long-term yield also, right? It's considered as a long-term yield, but when you measure it, it's basically expressed as an annual rate. Okay, let's try and look at the options now. The money which is received in any of the years is not reinvested in subsequent years. Okay, money which is received in any of the years is reinvested in subsequent years at the rate equivalent to the yield till maturity. Money which is received in any of the years is reinvested in subsequent years at the discount rate, and then same thing, but it is reinvested at the cost of capital. So the fundamental property of yield to maturity is that when you're receiving those fixed payments on the bond, whatever money is being received year on year, that money gets reinvested not in the basis of the discount rate that is available for that particular bond, right? So discount rate would be the rate that is at which the coupon payments are being made, right? So that's the discount rate. But when you're looking at reinvestment, the reinvestment for the money that is coming in each of the years subsequently, that money gets reinvested not at the discount rate, but that money gets reinvested at the expected yield till maturity. That's the context as far as your YTM is concerned. So in this case, since all the other options are either talking about discount rate or cost of capital, and option 1 says that it's not reinvested at all, so all these are incorrect. So correct answer in this case becomes option B, which is basically talking about the amount being received to be reinvested in subsequent years at the rate equal to the yield till maturity, and that becomes our answer in this particular case. Great, let's move on to the 10th question for the day. Again, 30 seconds for you to pause the video and mark your answers. Okay, so what is this one asking? So this one is basically saying which of the following is the characteristic of a bond and not of equity. So one thing which is very clear is that when you talk about equity, there is obviously a dilution of ownership, because you're giving a stake or a part of your company or a percentage of your company to the equity holders, right? Whereas in case of a bond, there is no dilution of ownership, right? Bonds basically provide you a regular stream of income, and that income is in the form of coupon payments that you'll keep receiving depending on the frequency of the bond, right? Usually it's quarterly, half yearly, or annual, right? So technically bonds basically provide you a fixed income, right? Now, variable income, even in the case of equity, is not sure. So equity, it all boils down to your holdings, and when are you planning to sell off your holdings, and what is the market conditions prevalent at that particular point in time, right? So again, in case of equity, I can't even say that there is variable income. It could be a variable income or it could be a variable loss as well, right? So this pertains to equity, right? Dividends again pertain to equity. Voting rights again pertain to equity and the share that you possess as an equity holder, right? Variable income, neither debt nor equity. It's very difficult to categorize it in either of the categories, but fixed income is definitely pertaining to your debt or bonds, and that indeed becomes my answer for this particular question. Right, so let's move on to the 11th question for the day. 30 seconds for you to pause the video and mark your answers. And here we go. A bond which matures multiple times over a period of time and can also be redeemed multiple times, right? So that's the question here. What is the name of that particular type of bond? Now, if I purely apply logic, I don't even have to think too much in this particular case. If I purely apply logic, I've seen a lot of serials, mega serials, so on and so forth in our lives. So we talk about binge watching episodes, right? So what do I mean by binge watching? It's a serial. Something is going on continuously, right? So that's the context. So if something is maturing multiple times and can also be redeemed multiple times, I'm taking a punt or a guess that it has to be a serial bond. Why am I saying that? Because multi-period bond sounds to be a very simple name. Similarly, when I say multiple bond, it does not really specify what exactly is happening, right? So it's definitely not a single period bond. And I know that perpetual bond or prep or console does not have multiple maturities or multiple redemptions. So these two are definitely out of question. These two are way too simple for them to be answers. So automatically my answer becomes serial bond. And this is if I am someone who does not understand finance. But if I understand finance, I know for a fact that serial bonds are financial bonds that can mature in installments over a period of time. And that's the context. The other fundamental difference that you should understand between, let's say, a serial bond or something called as a term bond is that your term bonds are ones which mature and become due on a single date, right? Whereas serial bonds do not mature or come due on a single date. They basically have their maturities which are staggered. Now, when I talk about being staggered, they could be staggered over several or many years, right? So basically, your serial bonds become due over a series of dates. And that's the reason why they are called as serial bonds. So basically, multiple maturities and multiple redemptions. So the answer in this case is option A. Right, so let's move on to the 12th question for the day. Again, 30 seconds for you to pause the video and mark your answers. Here we go. Saying return obtained from a bond if the coupon payments are reinvested at the same rate of interest. So in this case, when you're reinvesting, this brings into picture again what we discussed during YTM, right? So yield to maturity bond essentially talks about a scenario wherein your coupon payments that are being received are being reinvested at the same rate, and that rate is nothing but the YTM, right? So in this case, the return obtained is basically known as your yield to maturity. Definitely not simple interest, definitely not compound interest. Now let's try and understand IRR. So IRR is basically known as your internal rate of return, and it is a method of calculating an investment's rate of return. That's the thought process. Now, when I say internal, it basically means that the calculation excludes any kind of external factors. So the external factors could basically be your inflation, the cost of capital, or the financial risks involved. So if I have to look at your IRR, essentially when I calculate your net present value, it's considered, let's say, if there are n time periods, okay, the summation of your Cn, this basically refers to your cash flows in each of the periods C1, C2, C3, so on, divided by the rate at which it is to be discounted. So this rate, this R, is basically your internal rate of return. And when will this become the internal rate of return? This R will be called as the internal rate of return when the net present value that we've calculated as per this formula of all the cash flows becomes equal to 0. So the value of R at which your NPV becomes equal to 0, that's the value to be considered as your internal rate of return, right? So I hope IRR is clear. And of course, discount rate is the rate that is applicable when I'm looking at discounting, or it could also be the rate at which the payments are happening for a particular coupon. But when I'm talking about reinvestments of the coupon payments, that basically is the fundamental property of your yield till maturity. That's why the answer in this case becomes option C. Right. Let's move on to the 13th question for the day. Again, 30 seconds for you to pause the video and jot down your answers. And here we go. Which of the following statements about bonds is false? So let's understand the basic thought process behind bonds, right? So what happens is, most of your bonds, right, they pay a fixed interest rate, right? Now, as an investor, when would a bond be attractive to me? A bond would be attractive to me when I see that the overall interest rates in the markets are quite low, whereas the bond is offering me a slightly higher interest rate. That's when the bond becomes attractive to me. And if the bond becomes attractive to me, what happens to the price of the bond? The price of the bond will go up because obviously the demand is going up. So if demand goes up, the price also goes up, right? And this was the case when the interest rates were low. Now, if the interest rates are high and the bond is still providing me only a fixed interest rate, then in that case, the bond will not be as attractive to me as compared to some other investment which is offering me a higher interest rate. So because the bond becomes unattractive, the demand itself for the bond will go down, and if the demand goes down, automatically the price would ideally fall. So that's where the inverse relationship kind of exists, wherein we say that if the price increases, you're expecting the yield or the interest rate to decrease, or vice versa, wherein I say that if the yield increases, the price is expected to fall. So that's the fundamental correlation as far as bonds is concerned. Just remember that your price is inversely proportional to your interest rates or the yields as far as bonds are concerned. So what's the answer that fits the bill? This is directly proportional. So this does not fit the bill, right? And this is inversely proportional. This fits the bill. This is inversely proportional. This also fits the bill, right? When there is a price change, there is a corresponding impact on yield. This is also correct. So which is the only one which is false? Option B, and that becomes my answer in this case. Right, so let's move on to the 14th question for the day. So the question says, call risk is a risk which is associated with which of the following, right? So I basically look at options and my radar automatically starts saying that, okay, we talked about call options and maybe this is one of those, but we have to read through these options a bit more carefully. So first of all, to understand what is call risk is basically a risk that a bond issuer, okay, the issuer or the person who is generating those bonds will basically redeem those bonds, okay, redeem those bonds prior to maturity itself, right? So he is not allowing or giving the time period for the bond to mature, right? This means what happens to the bond holder in such a situation? What it means is that the bond holder will receive the payments on the bonds, but since it is being redeemed prior to maturity, in many cases the bond holder will be reinvesting, right, in a less favorable environment, right? Because this particular bond issuer basically redeemed the bond prior to maturity. Whatever money that the bondholder was getting up till the time of maturity, that amount has to be reinvested because he's an investor at the end of the day. So he will be looking to reinvest, and there is a possibility that the conditions might not be favorable. There is a possibility that the reinvestment may have to happen at a lower interest rate environment, right? And that is where the risk comes in for the bondholder, wherein the bond issuer can redeem a callable bond before maturity. So if the bond issuer calls the bond back, then the bondholder has that risk, wherein if the bond is being called back, the amount that has been received by the bondholder till that point in time and the amount that the bondholder will receive at the end of the redemption period, that will have to be reinvested in less favorable conditions, and that is the risk involved, right? So it is not to deal with equities, not to deal with stocks, right? And it's not very clear as to what D is trying to mention. It just says high investment in one instrument, so it's not very clear in this option as well. But it has to deal with bonds and definitely your debt related securities, right? That is the context as far as your call risk is concerned. It's associated with debt securities, and more specifically it's associated with bonds, and we're talking about callable bonds, and that becomes my answer in this case, which is option B. Right, so let's look at the 15th question for the day. What does it say? Which are the types of trades that are cleared through CCIL or Clearing Corporation of India Limited? So don't get confused between CCIL and ICCL or NSCCL, right? So this pertains to BSC, this pertains to NSC, and this is pertaining to dealing with all kinds of clearances that need to be done as far as your government transactions or government securities are concerned. Now, when I talk about government securities, what are the categories? You talk about CG-SECs or your central government securities, or you talk about SG-SECs, state government securities. So all of those transactions are basically cleared through your CCIL only. So it's basically a clearing entity which essentially looks at clearing all the trades pertaining to the government. And that's what CCIL deals with. Don't get confused between CCIL and ICCL. ICCL pertains to a very specific scenario, and NSCCL also presents itself for a specific scenario. Some of the other ones that are good for you to know is basically your India International Clearing Corporation Limited. This is basically for your International Financial Service Center, IFSC centers, right? Then you have your Metropolitan Clearing Corporation of India, that is for Metropolitan Exchange. Then you have your Multi-Commodity Exchange Clearing Corporation Limited, that is for your MCX. Then your National Commodity Exchange is for NCX, and we've already discussed about NSC. And then you have your NSC IFSC Clearing Corporation Limited, that is for your NSC IFSC as well. So these are some of the clearing agencies that are there in India. Their job is to primarily look at settlement of your transactions or settlement of your trades. CCIL specifically caters to transactions in government securities, right? And that's the answer in this case. Okay, let's move on to question 16 for the day. So basically 30 seconds for you to pause the video and mark your answers. And here we go. So there is something called as a liquidity adjustment facility that is provided as a window with the Reserve Bank of India, and your scheduled commercial banks and your primary dealers can partake in that facility. And the idea of using that is to regulate the liquidity within the market. So that's why it's called liquidity adjustment facility. Kitna cash flows rahega system mein, that is something which is governed by the LAF or the liquidity adjustment facility, which basically has your two processes. One is your repo and the other one is your reverse repo. Now what happens in each of these is what is being asked in this question. So when I talk about a repo, it basically is nothing but a repurchase. So when I talk about the repo rate, it's one of the key components of LAF, right? And it was introduced basically under the Narasimhan Committee as a key banking sector reform, and it was introduced under LAF. And the key role of the repo rate as being currently managed by RBI is to control the amount of liquidity that is there in the economic system. What it essentially means is that if there's a reduction in the repo rate, it basically allows your banks to get loans or advances at a cheaper rate, and it automatically increases the liquidity in the system. On the other hand, when the repo rate increases, the borrowing becomes more expensive for banks, which in turn will lead to an increase in the loan interest rates and also reduce the liquidity in the financial system. When I talk about repo, it's basically a money market instrument which allows your short-term borrowing, right, using specific kinds of debt instruments. And when I say specific kinds of debt instruments, these basically pertain to your government bonds or your treasury bills, right? So these can be used as part of the transactions. Now, when the central bank or RBI basically lends your money to your commercial banks, the interest rate charged by RBI is basically termed as your repo rate. So technically, RBI is also many times known as the lender of last resort, right? It is the final institution that any bank can go to as far as the lending aspects go. So what happens is that when I look at repo, RBI basically buys those securities, right, and loans the money to your banks, right? And obviously the rate that is agreed upon is the repo rate. Now, depending on what type of a repo it is, if it is an overnight repo, what will happen is the next day itself, the money will be returned by the banks to RBI, right? And the RBI would be returning the securities. And obviously the banks will return the money with the interest also being included as part of the component, right? So that's the reverse cycle of repo. And similarly, it happens for reverse repo also. So in reverse repo, what happens is your RBI will basically sell securities, right? And basically suck the liquidity out of the market. So what happens here? When RBI is buying securities in repo, it is basically injecting liquidity because it is giving money to banks, right? When it is selling securities and the banks are basically buying those securities, what exactly is happening to the liquidity with the banks, right? The money is getting sucked out from the banking system and it is basically going to the RBI. And then again, reverse repo will also have the second leg, wherein let's say if it is an overnight reverse repo, on the next day what will happen? Next working day what will happen? The RBI will basically get those securities back and banks will basically be returned the money with the interest. So that's the fundamental thought process as far as repo and reverse repo is concerned. So repo is basically an instrument which basically injects liquidity into the system, and the way for me to remember this is think of it as RIL. Right, so all of you are aware of Reliance Industries Limited, but I'm using that acronym in another context. So I say RIL in the sense, repo injects liquidity and reverse repo sucks out the liquidity. And that's the answer in this case. Repo injects liquidity and reverse repo sucks out the liquidity. The other type of repo is basically your term repo, which is where all of your recent developments also fill into the context. You talk about your TLTROs and a lot of those as well. So all of those technically fall in a different kind of a bucket. So here, the answer in this case becomes option C. Right, let's move on to the 17th question for the day. It talks about treasury bills. Now, when I talk about a treasury bill, what kind of an instrument is it? It's an instrument which basically is a government security, right? Understand one thing, that securities are not directly issued and managed by the government in much context, because that's too much of work for the government in the sense of area of expertise is concerned, right? So they would preferably leave it to someone who's an expert in this manner. So it's basically dealing with government securities issued by the Reserve Bank of India. And what is the purpose? Purpose is for managing the short-term funding requirements of the government. That's what treasury bills do, right? So while it's an RBI issued security, it's not specifically meant for RBI. So this answer is incomplete and it's definitely not a corporate issued security. So automatically the answer in this case becomes option C. So the other thing to consider is also that your treasury bills are also considered as your zero coupon securities, right? And they're issued at a discount and they are redeemed at their par value, right? So when they're issued at a discount, that differential between the discount and the par value is nothing but the interest component that you actually tend to gain. So when you look at the kind of treasury bills that are there in India at this point in time, you're basically looking at a 14-day, 91-day, 182-day and 364-day treasury bills. So these are the maturity durations that are there, right? So that basically gives us some idea about what kind of instruments these are, and these are essentially used as money market instruments and short-term lending instruments. It's a government security issued by the RBI for managing the short-term funding requirements of the government. So the answer in this case is option C. Moving on to the 18th question for the day. Again, 30 seconds for you to pause the video and mark your answers. And here we go. We're talking about commercial papers and asked as to what exactly is the purpose and what is their maximum maturity period. So when I say commercial papers, these are definitely instruments which are not issued by the government or by banks, right? So all of these options automatically get eliminated. So you're left with instruments which are issued by companies and they're basically used for managing the short-term requirements for the companies, right? But the problem here is the maximum maturity period of commercial papers is not 240 days. So this option also goes incorrect. So there is no correct option as such in this question. The correct answer would have ideally been by companies for managing your short-term requirements and a maturity period of 1 year. That was the correct answer that we were looking for, but since none of the options fit that context, the answer in this case becomes option E. Right, so again, basically a money market instrument, and again, in a way it is unsecured money. So you have to rely on the corporate and their credit worthiness. That's how it works, and technically a sort of a promissory note as well. So that's what your commercial papers in India are all about. So CP is the short form for commercial papers. Okay, let's move on to the 19th question for the day. Again, 30 seconds for you to pause the video and mark your answers. And here we go. So when I say CDs here, the context in the case of debt markets is obviously referring to your certificate of deposits, right? So when I look at certificates of deposits, so these are again your negotiable money market instruments, and they're generally issued in your dematerialized form, or it could also be a promissory note, and against any kind of funds that are deposited at a bank or any other financial institution for a specified period of time. So these are essentially not issued by a regulatory body. So RBI, which is the lender of the last resort, or SEBI, which is the governing body for your companies and stock markets, and neither the Ministry of Finance will come into the picture in this case. So essentially, your certificates of deposits are essentially issued by the banks as far as this given options are concerned. The minimum size and maturity, so you're looking at 1 lakh as the minimum amount, or in multiples of 1 lakh. So when I talk about specifically your commercial banks, you're talking about a period of 7 days to 1 year for commercial banks, and for financial institutions, the maturity should not be less than 1 year, but not more than 3 years either. So that's the context and some information about certificates of deposits, but the answer in this case is fairly straightforward and simple, which is option C. Okay, let's move on to the final question for the day. Again, 30 seconds for you to pause the video and jot down your answers. And here we go. What's the question? It says, which of the following are interbank call money market participants? So interbank means in between banks and transactions happening between them in terms of lending or borrowing, right? So which of those are participants? So obviously, when I say SCBs here, it stands for your scheduled commercial banks. Your PD stands for your primary dealers. SFBs stand for your small finance banks. And private banks, of course, are private banks. So when I talk about the interbank call money market, essentially your scheduled commercial banks and your primary dealers are the fundamental participants who are allowed in that. So essentially, when I look at the overall list that's been provided by the RBI, your participants in your call or notice money market basically includes your scheduled commercial banks, excluding your RRBs. And looking at your cooperative banks, other than any kind of land development banks, and your primary dealers. There are obviously lending and borrowing limits that have been placed on them. So no other non-bank institution other than your primary dealers are permitted in the call or notice money market. So that's some update for you. So in this context, as far as this particular question is concerned, the answer will be option E, which is both A and B. Excellent. So that brings us to the end of this particular session. I hope you enjoyed this session and got a good grasp about what essentially is debt markets. What do I mean by time value of money? What do I mean by annuities? What are bonds? What are the terms related to yield to maturity and a lot of such terminology? So I hope there will be some amount of clarity that came in after this particular session. So this basically lays the foundation or fundamental understanding that is required to probably understand more complex and even more intriguing terms and terminologies as far as your entire finance world is concerned, right? So I hope you enjoyed this particular session and the methodology that I used, wherein we used questions from previous years and built concepts based on those. So I hope you enjoyed that overall process. So that's it for this particular session, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session. Continue your preparation, keep working hard, and as they say, as long as you possess the FDs, you can succeed with anything in life. So when I say FDs here, what do I mean? You're talking about focus, you're talking about discipline, and you're talking about self-belief. So if you have your FDs, focus, discipline, and self-belief, there's no one in this world that can stop you from achieving your goals, right? So on that note, this is Ravi signing off, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session. Until then, keep working hard, keep studying hard, and trust me, you will ace your exams. See you.